I'm going to do it. It's on you, Chief. I'm going to call this meeting to order and would like to invite you all to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As required by Section 84-1412, subsection 8 of the Nebraska statutes, notice is hereby given that a copy of the Open Meetings Act is posted for your examination on the wall inside the door to these council chambers. May we have roll call, please?
Miles Bannon is absent this evening. Keith Kropa.
Here.
Mark Werner.
Aye.
Cheryl Welch. Here. George Klein.
Here.
Move we approve the agenda.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Okay. May we have roll call, please?
Werner.
Aye.
Welch.
Yes.
Klein.
Yes.
Kropa.
Yes, ma'am.
Move we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Tonight, the consent agenda consists of the normal minutes for city and council meetings. There's no correspondence and no minutes for other boards and commissions, so that's really boring. It also includes the monthly treasurers and water report, a fire department membership update, the resignation of Andy Rising from the Business Improvement District Board, and one administratively approved SDL for Wild's Bar and Grill for a wedding reception. May we have roll call, please?
Werner.
Aye.
Welch.
Yes.
Klein.
Yes.
Kropa.
Yes, ma'am. All right. First item on the agenda is Deb Coddier of the Northwest Nebraska Development Corporation for her report and update. Welcome.
Good evening, thank you. A couple of things I wanted to give you the most recent update that I have. We have spent considerable time the last couple of weeks visiting with our federal congressional delegation regarding the Pine Ridge Job Corps Center. We have in this community what's called the the Community Relations Council, of which Clayton Reason is the chair. And he and I have met with Tammy Calamari and a couple other Job Corps folks, as well as some of the media people, to try to figure out what would be the best way to get at getting information, correct information to the right people. So we began that process 2 weeks ago. We worked hard at trying to draft letters that included the benefits that we saw for the city within the Pine Ridge Job Corps Center, and the difference between a CCC Job Corps Center, which is managed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture through the Forest Service, and the difference between that and what would be considered a contract Job Corps Center. So as you all know, the word came out that they were going to close a half a dozen or so of these centers and then transfer the operation of 15 of them from Department of Ag to the Department of Labor. The biggest concern that we had, of course, was that would eliminate 56 jobs on the center out there, federal jobs, and that the operation of the Job Corps Center as a training facility would then be contracted to a private business. The more we visited with the Pine Ridge Ranger District here, as well as other Job Corps Center folks, we learned that there were some other critical concerns that we would have as a community in losing our federal status as a Job Corps Center. The most important, of course, is the quality of education that we would be able to offer the students, 80% of which come from eastern Nebraska, so this is not just a western Nebraska or just a Chadron issue with losing jobs. It's the ability to provide the kind of training that they're currently getting, which includes high school education as well as some really concentrated efforts on language, English as a second language, and some particular items that only happen at CCC Job Corps centers, and that is their ability to assist in firefighting, particularly wildfire or forest fire fighting. The director of the Pine Ridge District here told us that if and when this center were to be changed over to a contract center, they would lose the ability to contract with center-trained, up-and-coming firefighters. There would not be that support group that would help with firefighting, either on this forest or any other forest within their purview. So we saw that as a real critical issue for the health and welfare of our public lands, as well as our ability to help these students. So we began this letter writing campaign. I have to tell you, it's not as easy as it used to be. Snail mail, as you call it, takes a very, very long time to get to an elected official because of all the screenings and the nuking and whatever has to happen so that they are safe to open the letters. If you email them, you must go through their online presence, their actual website, and prove that you are their constituent, right down to a zip+4 zip code, or you can't send them a message via email. And if in fact you want to contact someone other than your own elected official, your own congressman, you have to call, because they won't accept letters via email to the other 2 congressional districts in this state because we're not their constituents. So it's a little frustrating in that regard. So then we got to the point where we thought, this is critical enough, we need to be making some phone calls. And found very quickly that what that amounts to is somebody on the other end of the line answering the phone, making a hash mark, pro and con, and they really took very little information, didn't take my phone number down, didn't ask for much of anything. Even when I said specifically I would very much like for someone to get back to me on this, this is really critical. In the meantime, there were lots of stories floating around on Facebook, lots of editorial information that was being published in the various journals and things that Job Corps is affiliated with, particularly in those states where there is another CCC Job Corps center that was having the exact same concerns that we are with the firefighting ability, the quality of the training that would come afterward, and the loss of jobs to small towns. And one of the U.S. senators stood up and stood up for his center in Anaconda, Montana, called the president, and was able to get the decision reversed for that one particular center. So we thought, well, maybe this isn't quite such a done deal as we thought it was. First part of last week, we started hearing about specific legislation that was being introduced on both the House and Senate sides to by Congress members who have who have CCC Job Corps districts, Job Corps centers in their districts, and it was a whole variety of things. But the 2 that were most important to us was on the House side, there was an amendment to their budget that was passed with Congressman Smith supporting it. That would essentially remove any dollars from USDA's budget or labor's budget that would go toward any sort of changing or shifting or doing away with Job Corps centers. That's the way they've decided to handle it on the House side. On the Senate side, there's a senator, I think it's Senator Daines or Tester, one of the 2 from Montana, who actually has introduced legislation that would require USDA and labor to halt what they're currently doing and take a harder look at it and come up with some other justification other than saving or eliminating 1,100 jobs and some things in the budget for the federal level. I have yet to hear back from either Deb Fisher or Ben Sass, our U.S. senators, about where they sit on this issue. I have read in a couple of articles that quote them as saying that they're monitoring it, but I've not had any conversation with a staff member of any value on the Senate side. So while we're thinking that the House effort is progress, it's not the end of the fight, if you will. and it probably is simply a stopgap at this point. We need to continue to get information, accurate information, truthful information to our legislative or our elected officials at the federal level. We also think perhaps it wouldn't be a bad idea to be copying Governor Ricketts on some of this information, because if in fact it gets turned over to the Department of Labor to run, we've been told that it will be then further handed down to the Departments of Labor in each of those states that are impacted to go through whatever process they would do to get it transferred to be a contract center. So that's where we are right now. Clayton has done a yeoman's job. He's done several interviews. He's actually come over to my office and used the Skype option on my computer to visit with a TV station in Scottsbluff. I've had a couple of interviews. Stories have been in most of the regional newspapers as well as radio stations, so we appreciate the assistance from the media. It does look to us as though there is a groundswell of support to try to at least look more seriously at the impacts of doing away with particularly that firefighting component. That is what we have in our favor, what we have going for us at this Job Corps Center, because we all understand the need and the desire to do things more efficiently, to do more with less expense from the federal government level. So that has, again, taken up a little bit of my time. I also...
Before we leave that, Deb?
Yep.
This came as a big surprise to me. Normally, when we cut jobs like this, there's a congressional hearing or two. What was the genesis of this?
We have been told, and this comes from the director who was at a meeting, actually an awards banquet of some sort at a meeting in Denver, and they called all of the center directors together and said, this is going to be announced. And it was, in fact, a deal, an agreement between Sonny Perdue, the Secretary of the Department of Ag, and Alex Acosta, the Secretary of the Department of Labor, that this would happen. They would literally transfer the responsibility for these centers, closing, I think, 9 and leaving 16 to be transferred. There was, in fact, a publication in the Federal Register, but it really was just about commenting. You were not allowed to comment on whether or not you thought it should happen. It's whether or not you thought they've gone through the correct process. So that's all I am aware of. I believe that the center directors were all caught very unprepared, very flat-footed about this, and within 24 hours we're told, get all your people on a conference call, we're going to tell them over the phone, which I thought was really not handled very well. But again, if in fact the Secretary of Ag says this is how I'm going to get to some budget cuts, the only way to really have any major impact in that at a meaningful level is to cut people, to cut positions and salary and operating expense for the center. So, roughly $4.5 or $5 million operating and or budget. You take that times 25, and that's starts getting to be some real money, I guess. But that is all I know of in terms of.
So it is purely executive decision, no congressional involvement until now.
I don't know if there was any congressional involvement or not, Mark. I can't say.
Yeah, okay.
I was not aware of any. Many times in the past 55 years history of the Job Corps Center, we have heard that there are efforts to either close it or to change it significantly or to cut the number of students or cut the number of staff. And each time there have been reports produced that say this center, Job Corps centers that are run by USDA, have a better educated student at the end of the process. They do it less expensively than contract centers, and those students go on and are more successful than other Job Corps students. So that's a fact. You can look that up. So to say that we're going to do this to save money, if that's your only goal, it's somewhat of a, cutting off your nose in spite of your face, in my opinion. And so we have been working really hard to see that we keep those jobs in town and keep those students on their path to their career goals. Yes?
Deb, what I'd like to tell you is last week, I was in Washington, D.C., lobbying for action on climate change. And in between my meetings regarding that, I walked into Senator Sass's office and wrote a personal note in support of the Job Corps Center here. I also, after my meeting, spoke with Cicely Beatty, the legislative aide for Senator Sass, who pulled me aside to talk about that. So I can give you her name.
That would be great.
And so I did speak to some people in Washington, D.C. about that.
If you know who the person is you're trying to communicate to, pardon me, to the point where you have that individual staffer's email, you could probably send anything you'd like via email, attachments and that sort of thing. On their website, it's an X number of characters. They won't let you attach a PDF. They won't let you put anything on that they don't want to deal with. And I understand that. The security issue is pretty serious. So what we sent to them was essentially the letters that I wrote for Clayton, as well as my own letter, and some others have apparently sent their information on as well. We just have to stay on it. We have to, at some point, demand some sort of a response other than we're monitoring it from our friends on the Senate side.
I believe very fervently that they need the assurance from their constituents that this is an important issue to us.
I agree
so
with
the
you.
more telephone calls that they receive, the better.
Yeah, yes, yeah. Even though it is kind of a numbers game, but yes.
Indeed.
You may have to play their game. So that effort continues. As it relates to my report, I did have one thing I was going to add about the meeting that we have planned for Wednesday, which is an actual function of the Nebraska diplomats. But we will be hosting the governor and the director of the Game and Parks Commission and the director of the Tourism Commission. And as it turns out, the lieutenant governor is actually going to be in Chadron that day as well. So he will come to the luncheon. I honestly don't remember the last time we had both the governor and the lieutenant governor in Chadron at the same time. I'm not sure it's ever happened. So it's kind of a cool thing. And we're going to talk about tourism. We're going to talk about the importance of private industry and keeping people in town overnight or in town for a few more hours, or to have them come back and spend some vacation time here. So we're doing our part to try to continue to push what we believe are the industry categories that fit well in our community and that actually provide some jobs for local people, not just minimum wage, part-time, summer help at the motel, but those people who actually invest and build the Runzas and build the Holiday Inn Express and those kinds of things. So we invite you to attend that if you're able. 11 o'clock Wednesday at the Holiday Inn Express, and we'll be all done by 1 o'clock. And I think that is all I have, unless you have other questions.
I had a quick question regarding your Heartland Expressway. You wrote work on additional ROW acquisition and engineering. Is that right of way?
That is correct.
Okay.
One of the most time-consuming, laborious, and frankly difficult pieces of building new highway is deciding on the route, paying for that, and then actually getting that little additional land that you need along the route in order to put the highway through. So we are still in that process on the second half of the Alliance South project. Right-of-way acquisition is it's kind of touchy, as it should be. I mean, we're actually asking people to give up a piece of their property. They are compensated somewhat for it, but there's a lot of moving parts there, and a lot of folks who, for whatever reason, aren't interested in selling any of their land.
Deb, if possible, could you stick around for item India? We're going to be discussing the write-off of CDBG loan,
Sure.
and
Absolutely.
you've got the most background in that stuff.
Be happy to.
Thank you. All right, moving on is a request for permission to use the Greenwood Cemetery and to block off the north entrance of the cemetery for the historical walking tours that are scheduled for Saturday, July 13th for Fur Trade Days. Does anyone have anything to say about this? It's a regular item.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve their request.
I'll second that.
Do we have to actually take roll call? Okay, roll call, please.
Werner,
Aye.
Welch,
Yes.
Klein,
Yes.
Crowfoot.
Yes, ma'am. All right. The next item, Resolution 2019-54, has been withdrawn, so we shall pass on that and move on to item E. Just be aware Miles is not here, so if there's not consensus, we will just have to. He'll just have to deal with it, I guess.
Okay.
All right, Greg.
So to provide a little contextual background, so in February of 2019, a representative from the FAA contacted the city in regards to evaluating the city's operating certificate and potentially changing it from a Class 3 operating to a Class 4. And during that time frame, we voiced some concerns in regards to airport funding as well as TSA screening of some of the operations at the airport. At that point, there was no additional correspondence from the FAA. And then on May 16th, we received a compliance letter regarding the ARF, which is the Airport Rescue Firefighting Equipment and Training component of our 139 operating certificate, and the compliance letter has been attached with the correspondence here. And essentially what the compliance letter was requiring is that the city become compliant with the equipment, which is the operations of a vehicle or a skid unit, as well as compliance training for our volunteer fire department. On May 29th, the city had a conference call with the FAA representatives regarding the compliance letter and how we address the concerns that were brought up. And as a result of that compliance letter, the city was presented with two options, which were also included in that. Option one, the city become fully compliant with the requirements set forth in Part 139, Sections 317 and 319 related to the ARF equipment and training. In addition, our operating class would be changed from Class 3 to Class 4. The change in Class 3 to Class 4 is related to the size of aircraft that is at the airport. So a Class 3 operating certificate is for scheduled aircraft larger than 10 passenger seats, so 10 and greater passenger seats. That's on a scheduled basis. A Class 4 is for unscheduled aircraft of larger than 10 seats or greater, which does not affect our airport since we are under that 10-seat threshold. Option number two is the city relinquish its airport operating certificate and thus no longer having to comply with any of the Part 139 requirements. Based off of our conference call with the FAA Central Region representatives, we did a lot of research in relation to option one and option two becoming fully compliant with ARF, and option two relinquishing our airport operating certificate. Based off of our review, the impacts for option number one, which would be keeping the 139 operating certificate, the essential air service would not be impacted by the changes in boutique airlines would not be impacted as well. The airport improvement program funding would have no impact. TSA would have no impact. The city budget, at the very low end, best case scenario, the city would have to fund $60,000 in the next 2 years to purchase the skid unit, as well as a new vehicle to put the skid unit on. In terms of staff resources, there would be no changes to the operations at the airport. And then the impact to the Chadron Volunteer Fire Department. I know Jack is here to speak a little bit about that as we, and getting the 3 volunteers to get this training is difficult at best. And when we talk about the other communities that are maintaining their 139, they typically have staff that is paid through the fire department to complete those trainings. The trainings would actually have to be held in North Platte, and at this time, some of those training fees and travel fees are unknown, because we're still working through some of the logistics of what it would be to actually send the department to North Platte to actually complete that training. A thing to note that is the staff that would be selected to complete the live fire training just can't be a new volunteer or somebody at the airport. It would actually have to be a person that has already gone through some of the minimum fire training, including some of the air pack training and all of those minimum requirements. So we wouldn't be able to just select any 3 to go out there and do the live fire training. It would actually have to be 3 that have already gone through the gauntlet of fire training that would then actually then qualify to be able to then go through that live fire training. Option number 2, when we look at relinquishing the airport operating certificate, when we look at the essential air service and we confirmed with the FAA, who then does the essential air service, that we would not be impacted if we relinquished our our airport operating certificate. We would still be able to maintain our ability to have essential air service. The only change would be if we requested an aircraft larger than 9 passenger seats. We would then have to be fully compliant with the 139, but at that point, in discussion with staff and discussion with airport in Cortez, Colorado, that just recently relinquished their certificate, they've had no impact on their essential air service or the boutique air services. For the airport improvement program funding, there actually is no impact to our funding through the AIP, and the total dollars will still be available. However, some of the priority lists potentially could change based off of the fact that the FAA prioritization on the 139 actually plays a part in how our prioritization through that funding. But our total dollars available would not change, since we still maintain the essential air service and the total number of boardings for the commercial air service. Confirmation with the regional director with TSA, there would be no impacts to the TSA operations at the airport as long as we maintain a commercial air service. We would still have the full TSA there, and they would continue to operate as they currently do. The city budget would have no adverse impacts. However, it's unknown right now what the potential cost savings could be without the requirements for the 139 inspections and other maintenance requirements. We would still be required to continue to maintain the field training and operations of the field farm as part of our requirement to provide fueling for boutique. We would still have to maintain those minimum certifications and maintenance and everything as if we were under a 139, and that's in order for us to be able to sell fuel through their protocols. So we'd have to maintain that minimum, but we would not be inspected under the 139 under that scrutiny of the field maintenance. On the staff resources, right now it's unknown exactly what the full impact would be, as the airport has operated under a 139 for many years. But as noted above, we would no longer be required to meet some of the 139 inspections for Saturday and Sunday inspections and weekend inspections and those types of things. However, discussing with staff, it is our intent to continue to maintain those inspections depending on the route that council wishes to go. That if the council chose to go option number 2, we would still continue to do the inspections as if we were under a 139, both as a operations need, and as well as identifying any needs at the airport, but also in terms of identifying and limiting our liabilities in terms of maintenance out there, that we can say that, we'd still, do the inspections and maintenance as though we were on a 139 compliance schedule. We would still document that as such, just for those reasons. The impact to the Chadron Volunteer Fire Department, the department would no longer have to be compliant with the 139 training requirements. And discussing with Jack, though, that the department would continue to still train with those minimum requirements for the airport familiarization, as well as the other minimum trainings that they would have out there. They would not just say we're done training for the airport requirements, because they would still protect the airport out there. This does not have an impact on our general aviation folks. This is just strictly related to our airport operating certificate and the 139 requirements. Our general aviation folks will not be impacted by either one of these decisions.
So it wouldn't impact our search for an FBO really at all? Not really. It may potentially make it easier to get an FBO, not having to be fully compliant with the 139 fueling and inspections and all of that. But, really, if an FBO is to come in, for them to do the compliance on a 139 really isn't that much additional work, because they would still then be required to do all of the fueling, training and that type of stuff. So for them, it's really not that big of an impact. But to be under the scrutiny of a 139 is not there, so it could potentially make it easier. Just a question for me. In their letter, they kept referring to the King Air 350. Was that just an example they were providing, or do we have King Air 350s coming in or wanting to come in?
So in our airport operations manual, it states that the two airplanes that could be coming in under Boutique Air are the Pilatus and a King Air 350. Boutique was going to be following up and actually sending FAA a letter that their King Air is actually certified through the FAA as a 9-passenger aircraft. So the way that the FAA looks at the number of seats is not based off of the number of seats that are currently in the aircraft. It's how they actually certify it coming out of the factory based off of the number of seats there. So you could have an aircraft that has 9 passenger seats, but it may be certified to have 30.
Gotcha.
So then you would be compliant to that 30 passenger seat, even though there's only 9 in it.
Okay.
So, but right now, based off of the FAA's requirement and Boutique's assurance that they won't be bringing their King Air 350 in until we actually have that authorization from the FAA that they have certified it as a 9-passenger aircraft. So,
Questions, comments?
Well, you always hate to step down, but I think it's probably inevitable that we have to do a practicality of the whole thing.
right. I know, doing a lot of, research into this, that, our initial concern is why would we want to go backwards and relinquish our 139? And, the only thing that we could find out of all the research and actually discussing this with Cortez and the airport manager out there is if we were to ever look at getting a larger aircraft in, based off of our discussions with Boutique, they have no changes that they're proposing in any of the near future for their operations out there. Again, it is a commercial airline service, and we have no idea what could happen in the future. But again, if we were to look at our boarding numbers in relation to the 9-passenger aircraft, I think it would actually make more sense through the Essential Air Service request for proposal, instead of asking for a larger aircraft, to ask for more routes, more flights versus a larger aircraft, which we could do that through the Essential Air Service request. So that's based off to the locals jurisdiction's request on that. So we could actually if we wanted more boarding numbers, we could actually request more flights versus a larger aircraft.
The aircraft that Alliance is, or that's serving Alliance now is larger than 9?
It is 9 seats. I do not know what the FAA has actually rated it as for total passenger size, but I believe through the proposal process that it could hold up to, I believe, 18.
It's
But
one
they-
of those that was built as an 18 and reconfigured so they could avoid the higher requirement for pilots.
Okay.
So a question, if we, in the future, decide to change our essential air service, will there be a penalty if we have to change a decision that we make tonight?
No, that's if we decided that we were to relinquish the airport operating certificate and down the road in 2 years that wanted to go back
2
to
years because the contract
because the contract is in 2
goes
years.
2 years.
And down the road, it says, okay, let's go back to a 139. We just make an application to the FAA for a airport operating certificate. However, at that time, we would have to go through the full compliance inspection and be fully compliant with 139, which would include the purchase of the vehicles. And at that point, with the FAA, we would not know, down the road if what we were to purchase would be fully compliant at that time as well, because they could change the minimum requirements for the ARF vehicles and could require a full vehicle like Alliance has now with a storage unit. At that time when Alliance did that, the total cost on that was a little over $1.2 million to purchase a vehicle and the building that it was housed in. So when you purchase the larger vehicles, you actually have to house it at the airfield. With this one here, we would actually be able to meet the minimum requirements now with the pickup truck and the skid unit in the back of it, and to be able to actually have it housed in one of the storage units out there that we have. So we'd be able to meet that requirement. However, down the road, doesn't necessarily mean that the FAA couldn't change their requirements and require the actual full ARF vehicle. Some of the things that are coming down the line that will be affecting our Chadron Volunteer Fire Department through the ARF training is that they're going to start to look at requiring EMT certification for the ARF component as well. So that's going to be an impact to our volunteer department to be able to manage the airport as well. So that is coming down the line, that a lot of airports now are starting to program out how they're going to get the staff trained to have the EMT and those types of requirements met. To provide a little bit of background on this here is this actually is something that the requirements changed back in 2004 with a compliance schedule to be fully compliant with all airports in 2007. However, the central region manager at the time allowed basically just that central region to have a waiver of that requirement from 04, interpreting the requirements different than the other regions. And since he has since left, and their internal audits is what has brought this up. So it's not that, Chadron is being picked on, by no means. This is something that the central region as a whole has been able to have a waiver on the ARF requirements for many years now. So
Okay. I just want clarification. ARF is a synonym. I'm sorry,
Synonym?
an acronym. Could you please tell me what it is?
it's airport rescue firefighting.
Rescue. Okay, thank you. And I have a question for Jack Rembrandt, please.
Good evening. Jack
Good
Rembrandt,
evening.
Fire Chief.
I'm glad you're here. I have a question. Do you think what we have is suitable for the size of the planes that we're landing at the airport right now?
Right now,
Yeah.
I feel so, it is. We're up to speed on our training as far as going out there, and I know when it comes to this title of 139 that the fire department plays a very big role in it. And ever since we started this at 2007, somewhere in there, our training is, we have multiple extra nights a month just to make this thing work out there. And for us to go and ask the volunteers to do more for nothing is not going to happen. And just to touch on some stuff, if we get the 3 members that are trained in live fire, say I'm one of them, and I get trained in live fire in August, I could retire from the fire department whenever, October, the day I get back. There's nothing holding these volunteers here. There's nothing that says I'm gonna wait until I have 20 years in, because the end isn't any different. And if you look at getting like this skid unit, the gear we use now works because we're rolling these city engines out there, but you'll have your own special ARF suits. I don't know what the shelf life is on those, but I know they're expensive, a lot more than the regular structure gear we have now. And then the EMT deal, I don't know how that's going to work. Our EMTs already have so many number of hours they have to have, and if they have to be out there while this plane lands, and it's going to be the same thing as for when Chief Lordino's crew goes out there for security. Well, if these folks on the volunteer fire department take time off of work at whatever time of day, and the plane's going to be half hour, 45 minutes late, who's going to pay for that? The employer's not going to put up with it, not for very long. And again, the only thing keeping these volunteers down there is the pride. And this new training, yeah, that's always fun, that first go around. But getting people to continue and stick with that stuff, it's not going to happen. And I don't know how we'd afford the time to do it, let alone the funds themselves.
I have an academic question here. Mr. Kozad ends his letter with, please let us know how you want to address this by 15 June. Did we get a dispensation?
Yeah, so that's when we called them on May 29th. We discussed that we would not be able to give them a response back by the 15th of June. They requested at that point a letter that we would not have the King Air coming in. That allowed us then to bring this forth at this council meeting for discussion as to how the council wishes to proceed. So we do have some time, and again, with the option to acquire the 139 equipment, discussion with Mark Kozad at the FAA that they would allow us a 2-year compliance schedule to purchase that equipment based off of the understanding that there's budgeting processes involved and those types of things. However, the training requirements that actually have to occur immediately and start to get those folks trained. So that there is no waiver or no time frame allowed on that. Those folks would have to actually start that training process now. Under the our current 139 operating permit, you asked the question, does the equipment that we have meet minimum requirements in terms of safety and that type of thing? The FAA's response is yes, that we have all the equipment necessary to provide adequate life safety for those folks flying in and out of the airport as we are now. However, their FAA requirements for additional safety for the larger aircraft is such that they would require us to get additional equipment. But we have been operating under our current equipment, and the FAA has approved it for multiple years. And discussion with the FAA is that this is something that they would continue to allow us to operate as we currently do under our 139 for 2 years, and that's why they understand that we're not in a situation where we're creating a life safety issue. This is more of a compliance issue. So our department is adequate with our equipment and everything now. It's more of a FAA compliance. So that's why, if they had concern as to the equipment not being adequate, they would have shut us down immediately and not allowed us to have any type of air service going. So
I guess one more question. You said that Boutique Air has 2 aircraft, the King Air 350 being one, and the other one that they use more frequently was
Pilatus PC-12.
Pilatus, okay. So if we changed this, if we surrendered our AOC and they realized that they could no longer use their Pilatus, that's gonna cause us problems then, wouldn't it?
No, that's
It's a small seat.
with Boutique Air, in discussions with them, the majority of their entire fleet is the Pilatus PC-12. So they only have just a couple King Air within their fleet. Most of those are typically the San Diego, and I forget the West Coast operations, but essentially their entire fleet is the Pilatus.
Okay.
The King Air did fly to Chadron for a brief period of time when they had, were going through maintenance on the Pilatus.
And that was before they upped their total fleet on the Pilatus and that type of stuff. So,
Well, to me, option 2 is more the common sense, particularly in the budget and the issues that you brought up, which to me are probably more important because that creates an ongoing cost too, as we have to rotate and keep people trained and maintain that. And then the maintenance of replacing the fire equipment, as we know with our current fire equipment, we can't just keep it infinitely, even if it's brand new. And so, but I do like the idea of maintaining the inspection schedule so that if at any time we do decide to move forward in 2-3 years, whatever we decide, we at least have that part down, and it makes that transition even easier in the future.
Like Greg had said, we'll still go out there and do our ground pedestrian training, because of course we may have to respond out there for something else.
Mhm.
We'll still go out there and, get people familiar with the fuel farm if there's an emergency out there, that kind of stuff, the numbers to call, the contacts. That stuff is stuff we've done always in the past, and that stuff we continue doing. But as far as moving a step forward on this, I don't see it working out well.
and the one thing that I did not get into this in option number 2, and Milo was doing quite a bit more research on this, is we would not actually be under no inspection. So the state of Nebraska Department of Aeronautics would actually still come out and do annual inspections on the airport to ensure that the runways were compliant, that we had the lights that were compliant and that type of stuff. So it's not that we don't fall under anybody's jurisdiction for inspection. We would actually fall under the state of Nebraska at that point, which their inspection criteria is a lot less stringent than the FAA's 139.
Will we be able to land the King Air for maintenance at the boutique facility?
Absolutely. That's the only time the 139 plays a part is if it's a scheduled commercial aircraft carrier in which they have passengers on the airplane. So if they were to bring the King Air in, and again, this is one of those, if the FAA does not rate it as, if the FAA rates it as 10 passengers or greater, and they brought the King Air in with passengers, then it would affect our ability to operate. But if they were just to bring it in empty, with no passengers, land it, do the maintenance, and leave, there's no impact on that. It also has no impact, and Chadron is not on the high priority list for diverted aircraft. That's Scotts Bluff, and I believe the other one is Rapid. That if we did have a diverted aircraft, it would not have any operational impact. If we did not have our airport operating certificate, they'd still be able to land and everything. So.
And will we be able to land larger private air folks that need fuel?
It does not impact the general aviation folks. So this,
just as long as the runway's long enough.
as long as they can land safely and take off safely, it has no impact on the charter air service or the general aviation folks. It's just strictly the commercial air service.
What do you want out of us tonight, Greg?
That's if you guys are of a consensus on one of the two options, we would like to be able to report back to the FAA on what the council's consensus would be. If there isn't a consensus, what we would look to do is report back that additional either follow-up information is required or additional discussion with a full council would be appropriate, and at that point we can report back to the FAA as well at that time.
So we can take care of that with a simple motion rather than a resolution?
I believe so. That's
So we want to make a motion to the fact that we want to surrender the AOC but maintain the there's some sort of a inspection schedule.
But maintain our inspection schedules as we currently do.
Proper term is,
That's
it's in, maintain it.
maintain
So,
our current inspection schedules.
I will make a motion to surrender the AOC and move that we continue our current inspections
Schedule.
as scheduled.
Second.
Second.
I think that's
Oh, you did?
that's
Oh, you
okay.
did? Oh, I didn't hear you. Sorry.
No worries. So, roll call?
Warner,
Aye.
Welch,
Yes.
Klein,
Yes.
Crowfoot.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to introduce Resolution 2019 Tax 63 and move for its adoption.
Now we need a second.
If there's a little hesitation, this morning I contacted the person, Deidre from Casey Peterson, and visited with her a little bit, and I'd really like to table this. And she could not come this evening because she was off to the National Association of State Boards of Accountants. She's chair of the South Dakota Board. Because I think there's some potential to, and I recognize the concerns, and I really, when I saw this, I thought, I feel a little dejected. I would think that maybe, based upon my background, I would maybe been contacted to see what I thought about some of this stuff. But that being said, I would like to move that we table it to, and contact Deidre, and if our president of the firm that we've had, Onquist, Maltzon, and others want to come too in 2 weeks, you're well and good, but I would like to hear personally from Casey Peterson.
How does this impact our timeline? Because I was thinking we were tight, right?
It's to address George's concerns, I guess, my thoughts on this is if we were to look at tabling this, what I would recommend then is to, instead of bringing them in for a discussion in front of the full council, what I would recommend is, since we would be discussing essentially contract negotiations with these two individual firms, is council wishes to have those discussions and to potentially have two council members sit in on those interview discussions outside of a council meeting to provide that then recommendation at that point versus allowing them to come in front of the full council to try and, address concerns at that point. That would be my recommendation. In terms of our schedule, I believe that if we were able to have a contract in place by the end of July, I think we would still have adequate time to provide for whichever firm to still complete those.
Is there anything you can tell us about your concerns, George, to make it easier to understand where you're coming from?
Well, I'm mostly concerned about the costs with Omquist and others. And there's a little confusion. I just need to clarify that with Casey Peterson because I think we'd be looking at some dollar savings.
I'd like to chime in here because I have reservations, and that's why I didn't want to second this as well. I think there's significant price differences in their proposals, and I do not believe that our quote of this would equate a blank check without having the ability to control costs. I don't believe that that's accurate. I did some calculations on my part, and I think we're talking about over $36,000 difference, and I think that's important to understand. if Peterson was deemed quote-unquote non-responsive, I too would like to hear, what is the rationale behind that? I understand that there were some things that Casey Peterson said that they might have to bill beyond what their quote was. But with the amount of this difference, even billing at the most expensive cost per hour, I have it calculated that that's 55 hours more of work. And they said the total would be 200. So I don't think that's realistic that the difference would be that great. I too am interested in learning more.
That's one of the concerns that I have is when we put RFPs out, whether it be for audit services, engineering services, or other types of bids, and we request that the proposer provide a lump sum price of an amount not to exceed, and then we ask them to provide certain specification items in there, the way that we want their proposals to be formatted and those types of things. And a firm, whether it be auditing or anything like that, is $10,000, $20,000, $40,000 less, and yet they did not meet what our minimum requirements are for that proposal to come back. And we turn around and say, you know what, we're going to go ahead and forego what we requested for and not deem them non-responsive just because the price is substantially less, does not equate to a fair bidding environment when we look at all the other proposers who then met those minimum requirements for providing what we requested. So we can look at it on the flip side and say, okay, are we then providing an unfair bidding climate to say that we want them to provide a lump sum price and it's an amount not to exceed, but we're going to look at the proposals and say, well, we'll go ahead and forgo that and not look at it as a non-responsive or responsive type of. If that is the case and we want to go down that path, then my recommendation is that we would then say, you know what, we're going to forego all proposals and then we're just going to completely rebid it. Because then at least we're providing a fair and equitable bidding environment, and we're not going to look at one proposal different than the other proposal. We have to look at them all equal in terms of the same playing field. And in my opinion, based off of the review of Casey Peterson's as well as additional follow-up, I still feel that they are deemed non-responsive. And the fact that even through the additional follow-up, they still were non-committal as to a maximum guaranteed price that they still cannot provide us, even when we requested them to take a look back at their prices through this process and said, okay, what type of cost could you look at for the preparation of the adjusting journal entries and the conversion of fund statements to government-wide, which is part of all of the scope of services that we requested and provided by Almquist. They were still unable to provide us a reassurance as to what that max guaranteed price would be, even as we contacted them through this process. So at that point, that's why our recommendation was to just go ahead and deem them non-responsive based off of the fact that, one, they didn't meet the requirements of providing a lump sum in the proposal, and two, they were still non-committal as to what their maximum price would be. George, I understand that they are substantially less in terms of the overall total audit cost, but when you look at the total sum of what they have proposed based off of what we could deduce as a potential of a max not to exceed, they're at 28,000. With the Almquist total at 38,200, we're only looking at a $10,200 difference, and that's with all items included in that. The one item that they did not include, as Casey Peterson, that we included as part of the request for proposal, was a cost to do the component units, and they excluded that out. After discussion with them, that could be anywhere from $2,500 and up. So there was no committal price at that point as well. So when we look at that, that only leaves essentially a $7,000 difference between the two firms when we look at the component units added into that, which could or could not be $2,500. That's why when we look at it, it's strictly what we have in front of us based off of the follow-up discussions. That's why we made the recommendation that the proposal from Casey Peterson be deemed non-responsive.
Is there any liability, just from my experience in a different type of area, but in bidding, if you were to accept a bid that didn't actually meet the requirements, but other bidders did meet the
Could be
requirements,
problematic,
they
yes,
could come
absolutely.
back and file
They
Absolutely.
can file a bid protest in
Right.
terms of.
Protest. Absolutely.
Yep.
So that's why we have to look at it and say, okay, when we put out the request for proposal and we say we want you to provide pricing for X, Y, Z scope, we want it in this format, and we want you to provide a final dollar amount at the end. And then we go through and say, okay, did they, in some form or fashion, meet the intent of what we requested? Did they have all the components, and did they provide us with everything that we requested in that? And if they did not, then the answer is they're non-responsive. If they did, then we can set it aside and say, okay, let's evaluate them now on a apples for apples basis. Now, since we only had, 2 proposals, it makes it a little bit tougher to then compare, is this price, high, or is it low, or is it a fair, market value for the work that's being done? It makes it a little bit more challenging, but again, we only received, the 2
Yeah,
proposals.
and
on
I
that,
was
so.
skeptical about the whole process because you were really pushing, and I wondered what was behind that, and
And again, when we,
I think we maybe should rebid the whole thing.
As we, received correspondence from one of the larger firms in South Dakota that has a pretty large staff, and at that time, they said that they didn't have the staffing capabilities to adequately, address what we wanted done here. So, when we look at, whether or not we are going to get more proposals, I don't know if that's really going to change. If we were to rebid it, I think, we would probably still get the same 2 proposals.
How are we compared to the last contract? Is it higher, lower?
It is, I believe, almost the exact same price. I think it may be $100 difference. I'd have to go back and look, but I believe it's almost the exact same contract value.
So I might be naive in asking this question, but I understand that AMG and L have been doing our audits. So they do have the advantage of knowing how long it took them in the past. Is that something that is public record that Casey and Peterson can know? I mean, I'm just wondering, that seems an advantage right there for someone who has already done it.
And when you look at, the scope of services on this, we provided them with the total number of transactions that occur in a fiscal year, and they're able to then, go off of and determine based off of the number of transactions, the value of each budget and that type of stuff. They're able to then get a cost estimate put together that should be realistic to the work that they would be performing. So it really doesn't necessarily provide them with an unfair bidding advantage, not being the previous auditor. But
What's the amount of time, let's say we're gonna rebid this, I assume it'd have the exact same thing, we would just reissue the bid with a further date further out.
RFP.
Sorry, yeah, RFP. That's gonna put us super duper tight on signing the contract by July, the end of July, right?
so if we were to have to rebid this, we would not be able to look at an award until sometime in September to provide adequate posting and that type of stuff. So we would, look at, having to then bring it back forth for re-advertisement, potentially the first meeting in July, having it posted for at least a month, and then another, potentially month to evaluate it or extend that bidding period out another month. We could be looking at, easily the first or second meeting in September that we would be looking at bringing back another recommendation.
Which
Depending on the time frame that we would have it posted. Now, if we were to look at expediting it, again, we could potentially be looking at then the first, more realistically, the second meeting in August on a really fast expedited schedule, which would then only give, basically a month of advertisement. And, assuming that all the bids came back, responsive and everything, and we were looking at, that second meeting to be able to do that, and that's on a very, very expedited process.
How much time was spent working with Casey Peterson? You said you'd reached back out to them. Was it just like one attempt to try to gather the information, or how much communication was done back and forth?
So I know Jeanette is not here this evening, but she was the one who did a lot of the correspondence. However, she reached out to them multiple times through email correspondence, as well as several phone call follow-ups to clarify additional information that was requested in the question. So our initial follow-up to the proposals was via email correspondence requesting additional information, both of Casey Peterson as well as Almquist in terms of content contained in the RFP. The big concern again with Casey Peterson and the follow-up questions that we had is one, their references did not include any firm or any municipality in the state of Nebraska. It was strictly South Dakota. So we requested additional references to contact, as well as trying to get a representation of the size of communities or school districts that they were doing audits with. The ones contained in their proposal were very small communities that weren't necessarily a representation of what Chadron could be looking at. They provided us that information, as well as requesting them to look at their fees and the statement that I think is of concern here when we look at the proposals in Casey Peterson's that says additional non-attest services could include preparation of adjusting entries in that statement. To specifically ask clarification as to what they were referring to, since the preparation of adjusting journal entries and specifically the conversion of fund statements to government-wide presentations was part of our previous audits, and those auditing firms conducted those services. We just wanted to get an idea of what is the magnitude of that scope of work going to be. And we had several additional follow-up discussions with them trying to pinpoint what that cost could be. And without any real firm answer at that point, we basically were making a recommendation for Almquist.
Were they able to give you a range?
They weren't able to really give us a true definitive range, other than that they would, when I spoke to Casey Peterson this morning, that essentially what they had mentioned is that the scope of services, that before they actually started that work, they would sit down with us and actually define what that scope of work is and the amount associated with that prior to starting those services. However, my concern is if we get down that path and we look at just what was here and they said, okay, it's going to take us an additional 60 hours to complete that, then we didn't actually save any money. We're actually on par with Almquist based off of the staffing required to do that. So we wouldn't really be at a dollar amount that is of any savings going with Casey Peterson at that point, because it's just unknown how much, they just haven't committed to how many hours it's going to be to do those services that were included with Almquist's proposal.
They did commit to, or that the estimated time would be 200 hours, whereas AMG&L committed to 185. I'm just wondering, how realistic is it that they have 60 hours more? Do you think that's really a realistic number to throw at us?
Again, I couldn't tell you how many hours they would estimate that it would take them to complete that work. I wouldn't. That's why I feel uncomfortable even recommending them, because I just don't know.
Right.
And without them committing to a lump sum maximum price, it just makes me feel uncomfortable that we're essentially, like I said in the memo, writing a blank check that says, okay, go ahead and get started. We'll work out the fees later. Mm-hmm. That to me just does not equate to, one, a fair bidding environment, nor does it match what we had requested in that scope. So that's why our recommendation was such. So.
And the Almquist bid could go up if we delay. Is that correct? They're not obligated to submit the same thing in if we put them in a Navy term. If we make it harder for them to complete things in orderly fashion.
That is correct. They could rebid at whatever, price that they wish to bid at. However, I think if they wanted to stay competitive and honor their original, proposal, I think, as part of their process, I think that they would probably go ahead and just resubmit what was previously submitted. However, they're under no obligation to honor that price.
Well, I did have preoccupation regarding this. I appreciate your explanation. And I think the point that the fairness of the bidding process is very important, and that the legalities that might result if we did not honor that. So I also feel that we have reached out to them on numerous occasions, as you stated. So at the onset of the meeting, I was not ready to support this, but I do believe I'm ready now.
Okay. So do we have a second?
Did you make a motion to table this? Is there a second for that?
I don't think there was a formal
Was
motion.
there a
on that.
motion, George?
I made a motion to table, yes.
We didn't have a second.
We didn't have a second on either of the motions so
No.
far.
So, hearing no second on the motion to table, we move on to the motion, the original motion for the resolution.
Well, don't we have to resubmit that since it failed once?
Well, yeah, we need to start again.
Okay. So we need someone to introduce the resolution again.
I'll give it a shot. Introduce resolution 2019 tax 63 and move for its adoption.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
And roll call, please.
Warner,
Aye.
Welch,
Yes.
Klein,
No.
Crupit,
Yes, ma'am. All right. Moving on to item G.
I'm not ready. I don't think we're ready on this, so I'm not going to introduce it.
Well, I'll introduce resolution number 2019-64.
I'll second it.
Resolution number 2019-64 is a motion to approve, is a resolution to approve the City of Chadron Employee Safety Regulations Manual. This is the second time it has come before the council, and adjustments have been made. Greg or someone would like to address this?
So I know some of the concerns were related to specifically the lockout tagout. Excuse me. The lockout tagout procedures associated with the training. I believe that through the review of the committee that I believe we have got those addressed, and that there was some additional questions related to some clarification items on the spraying and training associated with the commercial applicators licensing and that type of stuff. And I know, Cheryl, you may wish to discuss those more, but I believe that those were addressed as well. And I know Cheryl brought up some spelling errors that we will be addressing prior to final publication on this. So.
Okay. We didn't settle on a capitalization standardization. Sometimes city is capitalized, sometimes we say City of Chadron, sometimes city is not capitalized, sometimes department head is capitalized, sometimes it isn't. So just, if you want, to me, if it's going to be capitalized, go with City of Chadron. If it's, city, just the town, it shouldn't be capitalized. Throughout the training manual, there's the manual of training's referenced. In some places they talk about standardized training.
but there's no reference of where these lesson plans are and who would make sure that the lesson plan, the person doing the lesson plan could do it. So, I mean, are there lesson plans?
There's documents from OSHA that we follow, there's documents from the training plans for doing trenching and shoring. We follow the guidelines of what the state of Nebraska put out.
Well, yeah, so you've got you're giving me the references. What I'm trying to figure out is, have you established the minimum requirements of what needs to be taught out of the manual? I'm assuming those manuals are.
There's those sections in there that we use.
So you just take a highlighter and say, we're going to talk about this?
Basically. But I mean, like I said, Mark, if it's trenching and shoring, we've had people come in here and put a full day-long class on trenching and shoring. You're asking where we're getting our information. Most of it's from.
I'm asking if there's lesson plans. You referenced the references. They're in there. But so we don't have established reference
I
or
would say
lessons
there
plans.
is not a set plan.
Right. So and I guess what I'm worried about, you know, in the federal service, you have to not just have what the reference is, but what you're going to teach. And so a lesson plan, I mean, if you're teaching Hamlet, you've got the book that everybody reads, and then the teacher's going to talk about, you know, to be or not to be, and his or her take on that. So I'm just a little bit worried about that. I'm going to just go in order, Greg. Now, on page 8, I think we need to add something to the point under city manager. A new number 8, that the city manager will schedule council for biannual review of the safety manual and approval of any new members for the safety council. Otherwise, you know, it says in there that under the city council that we'll periodically review it. I think we need to say what the periodicity is, and I think we need to say you're going to schedule it for us. On page 11, under summary, and throughout the thing, we talk about supervisors. And this might just be my ignorance, but I don't know how supervisors are designated. Is it just by billet, or is it shift? But nowhere in there do we say how these supervisors who are going to be doing a lot of the training are designated. Are they in writing? You know, so I have no idea. Is it just the senior guy that's going to be there that day? What is a supervisor? I couldn't find that. Department heads are clear defined. City manager, clearly defined. Supervisors, not. On page 15, under after leaving the building, number 3, assemble at prearranged location. If you go to the schools, those prearranged locations are all designated. Do we designate them someplace? Is there one? Are there a couple of places designated for this building? I don't know. But it says they're prearranged. We ought to say where somebody in the building is going to know that. On page 26, section 3B, I think this is on first aid. The contents of the kits should be checked quarterly and documented, and expended items replaced. It doesn't say who's going to be checked by, or how it's going to be documented. Is it just initial on a checklist? But it says documented, but not how. On page 27, section 4E, we're talking about AED and CPR training being offered by the city. I would suggest that we would want to put in there that for our employees that would be on company time, so that we could get as many of those folks there as possible, because it's not a must that they do it, so we should incentivize it, in my opinion. On page 29, section 1 Foxtrot, Safety data sheets should be kept current, read by employees, and kept in an accessible location. Okay, how often? If these are what I had in the Navy, the material safety data sheets, they're boring as sin. And I had to beat my sailors over the head to get them to read it. So, read once a year, once. What's accessible? On the internet? That's where they probably are now.
No, they're not. They're in each department, in a book, usually at the front door, and then we have safety meetings at least once every 2 weeks.
But you're talking about the safe, for Clorox.
Data sheets.
Yeah, for Clorox, it is a burn hazard. Okay, so we're saying they're going to have to be read by the employees. I think you need to be, every time they use Clorox, they're going to read this. I don't know. It just seems too nebulous to me. Accessible, designated in each building or wherever you have it. Yeah. On page 36, section 2 hotel, this is me being a little pedantic. Materials which will burn, i.e. or e.g. To me, it's e.g. It's example, not this is. On page 41, section 1, Juliet, appropriate employees shall be instructed in safety, significance of confined spaces, and procedures. Appropriate employees, I didn't know what that meant. And I'm assuming, once again, that's what prompted me to ask, is there a lesson plan? On page 41, section 2, Juliet, designated responsible person. Designated by whom and how? Is it in writing? Is it in an email? Once again, it just, if you use a word like designated, there ought to be, the following questions. Also applies on page 42, section 4, Juliet, designated trainer. Designated by whom? What's the training required to be designated? How's it documented? Page 42, section 4, Juliet, employees will be notified whenever lockout or tagout will occur. And now I think that's too general. Nobody in this building probably needs to know that they've tagged out something in the street shop. That ought to be a much smaller, maybe it's just the department, maybe it's just a work center, but you'd be driving everybody crazy if you did it for every time you did a tag out. Page 42, section 4, Juliet, hazard controls. I honestly just didn't understand what you were driving out there. What is all equipment has single sources of electrical power? What does that mean? I couldn't get to where you were going on that. It just didn't follow for me. And then it says lockout procedures have been developed for all equipment and procedures. All equipment and processes, okay? Where are these procedures and who approves them? On page 43, it says qualified employees are certified. Okay, we're certifying somebody. How do you certify them? I believe this is the folks that can actually tag out equipment. Is there a training process behind that? Okay, on page 43, authorized employee training. When I looked at it, I thought that was the same. You meant to say qualified employees, because it seemed to be the ones that were doing the tagging out, but I couldn't tell. Also on that, it says authorized employee training retraining shall be at least annually. And how is that documented? Affected employee training, no documentation. It just says it'll happen. Page 44, routine maintenance and machine adjustment. This rare exception may be when specified developed. Okay, where are these specific procedures? Is it in the department head's office? Is it in a supervisor's office? This is a big deal when you're doing rotating equipment. If you've got the procedures, that's absolutely fantastic and what it ought to be. But where are they? How do they know to get them? And then on there two, for lack of a better term, void worksheets. I don't know how you do. These are on page 54 and page 57. There's line items for toxic fumes, vapors test. Do we have people on staff that do that? Does Baker Associates have to do that for us? I mean, how do we?
No, we have equipment. We have equipment that actually tests for this.
Then we've got certified guys, gas-free engineers that can do all that.
You're, as part of OSHA requirements, you are not required to be. You're required to be a competent person under OSHA that is able to run a gas monitor that then detects the limits of these items listed here.
And then on there, that's good to know. I didn't know those rules. And then there's one on there for parts per million of toxic fumes and vapors. How do you know what to test for? Is it has somebody gone off to say if we were entering a sewage tank, we test for hydrogen sulfide, and we know how to test for hydrogen sulfide. We've got the little proper testing equipment. Do we contract it out to an engineering firm? But I mean, those sewage tanks, if we've got them, and I assume we do, that can kill people. Same with diesel tanks.
Right, now the gas monitor is required to do confined entry, actually detect those.
So it's more automated than it used to be, is what you're saying?
Absolutely. That's the new equipment out there. Tests your oxygen levels, you test for hydrogen sulfide, it tests for your gases and all of that. So all of those are.
It's on the little monitor, and we've got it. I guess what I did, and is there a certification for that monitor that has to happen every year?
Yep.
And recalibrated once a year.
That's great. I mean, the old waste was terrible. We sent guys to school for months to learn how to do that. On page 57, competent, at the bottom of that, it says competent person in charge. How is that designated? Is there training for that?
And again, OSHA, competent person in charge. The competent person in charge could be anybody that day. It could be a department head. It could be.
And you're saying as long as we know what we're getting into.
It could be the laborer that's out there that is in charge of the crew that day. It really, by OSHA, competent person in charge is strictly the person who is of clear mind to be able to make a determination that either a hazard or hazard does not exist. And that's essentially how OSHA defines competent person. So it could be.
And we don't want to add any requirements that it would be your preference.
Well, I mean, when we're talking about, confined space specifically to this form, we had this discussion through the safety committee meeting, we said, a permit is prepared by, and it has to be the department head, it has to be the supervisor. Well, it could be, and it really should be by OSHA, whoever is going to be entering the confined space should be as that person doing the work. So that's why it's left as, it doesn't have to be the supervisor. Well, it's that competent person.
How many people are trained in the operation of that meter?
Pretty much everybody at the water plant. 4.
And yourself?
Me?
No?
No.
Okay, well, anyway, give you my thoughts. To me, lesson. Oh, look at.
I would just, you're concerned with the SDS, or Bev Bartlett, Safety Committee person. The SDS sheets, we have a person on, Nicole has done a tremendous job. Each department has a red binder specific for their department and the chemicals there. She does a great job of staying on people, get those updated, and we do ask that people familiarize themselves with it. Maybe not necessarily read the whole, but know where to find it and what's in it. And then with your question, as far as who's, qualified or determined, with crews the size that we have, you can't necessarily say it's always going to be Bob. Because if Bob's not there that day, then it is the qualified person in charge. And we just try to make sure everybody has the sufficient training for whatever that task is.
And how's the documentation occur?
We have, as far as like your lesson plans, it will rotate around throughout the year for what's applicable. Like the parks guys will go through a severe weather in the summer. What do you do? And you have a training sheet that we get each month on who was trained, what was the subject, who put it on.
And you maintain that?
Yes, we have a file.
But personnel has all those files?
Yes, yes. And our sources of information are OSHA, it's Milo referenced, and also EMC Insurance provides us with videos and training, and we can also get things through the league if we feel like we need to.
Well, I guess
we want to keep our people safe too.
Yeah, and these are lessons that are written in blood and deaths, and I've seen them. So it's important to me. I don't think it's ready.
I appreciate your comments, Mark, but this is a small town, not the federal government.
How many people that have died in voids? I know several.
Yeah.
It's not something to be taken lightly, in my opinion. And
no one here does.
And
yeah,
the more
we don't, but we can be bogged down with paperwork too.
Sounds like it's already happening, though, George. If you have stuff in this and somebody gets hurt and it's loose, and you can't prove that you've done it, you can get in a real logjam. And if we say somebody's designated, to me, if I'm being a pedantic lawyer, how was he designated? And if you say you're going to do something, you need to do it. Otherwise, that stuff's held out in a court of law, and you're fined, and you're responsible. And that's the way it should be. So anyway, I think with some changes we're there, but and it sounds like Bev's already doing most of it anyway.
No, it's a group effort.
Well, but the documentation part of it.
Well, I couldn't do it without Nicole.
Yeah.
It's a monstrous project, as you said. I could not do it without her help. I'm very grateful. She's done a super job.
And nobody wants to do this stuff.
And nobody wants to do it, but you have to.
Until something, it's not important until something terrible happens.
Exactly.
And I'm sure it's the same way at the fire department. But I think at the expense of waiting 2 weeks, we can tighten some of this up.
So, Mark, I appreciate your specificity, and you have all of this typed up. And so I have a question regarding it. With a little bit of time, we could get this tightened up. This is nothing that I have expertise on, and so is this something that you would be willing to take your notes and work with Bev and Nicole and just kind of
Absolutely.
put these words together, and
Yeah,
tighten this up, as you said, and that we bring it to the council in the next meeting? Is that something that would be a possibility?
I guess the other thing is it's not a council decision completely. There's a safety council that it's a two-way street. So I could give this to city manager tonight, and if they think that it makes sense, they can add the appropriate wording. If they think it doesn't, I'm sure there's some of them that doesn't, then they can come back with another proposal in 2 weeks. But I think there's some fairly simple fixes. And I don't think it's going to be more than a few paragraphs, tops.
Okay, so do we have a motion to table then?
Motion to table.
I'll second that.
Okay. Roll call, please, on the motion to table.
Warner,
Aye.
Welch,
Yes.
Klein,
Yes.
Crumpet,
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Motion, or resolution is tabled until the next meeting. Appreciate your comments, Mark. Most of them I agreed with. All right, moving on to item H.
I'd like to introduce resolution number 2019-65 and move for its approval.
I'll second that.
Sorry, the number in my book's wrong. All right, resolution number 2019-65 is a resolution to reschedule a public hearing to consider the levy of a special assessment for the maintenance of the business improvement district. Anyone like to speak to this or has discussion?
Is this scheduled for our normal council meeting?
So,
July 15th.
so what we had is this was back on a previous council. It was to be published on the 29th, the 5th, and the 12th of June. We ran into an issue with the publication. And after discussion with Donna, we felt that it was appropriate to go ahead and restart the process. By statute, we have to post the notice in a newspaper 3 weeks prior to the hearing. So if we were able to, and it was originally scheduled for this council meeting, so we just determined that it was best to go ahead and go ahead and reissue the notices.
Any further discussion?
This was my fault, guys. You don't have to blame
I wasn't trying to throw you under the bus. I was just saying there was an issue.
It came in, Donna had sent them over late, and I was trying to leave on vacation, and I misread her email, and so that's how it all happened. So, for refunding the city for the first publication.
All right. Any further discussion?
We all make mistakes. Glad to hear you were going on vacation.
Could we have roll call, please?
Warner,
Aye.
Welch,
Yes.
Klein,
Yes.
Crumpet,
Yes, ma'am. Okay, good.
I'll introduce resolution 2019 tax 66 and move for its adoption.
I'll second.
We asked Deb to stay. We have to talk
Yeah,
about it.
resolution number 2019-66 is to write off uncollectible loans of M&K RR Enterprises received through the Community Development Block Grant, the CDBG reuse program.
To give a little bit of background as to what this is in relation to, in 2005, the city and MKRR Enterprises closed on a reuse loan, and then a second reuse loan was issued in 2008. As part of the terms of that, those two loans, the collateral was to be the inventory and equipment held within the store. As part of the closing documents, the owners of that property and those who were responsible for this loan were not listed as personally liable for the debt. The city has been requested through the Nebraska Department of Economic Development to take formal action as to whether we continue to pursue collection of this or we officially write the debt off. based off of the terms of the loan and discussion with Adam, we are requesting that the council write these debts off based off of the fact that there is no collateral left to go after, nor is MKRR a active corporation in the state of Nebraska. So there is nobody currently personally liable for the debt of these two loans. Currently, the total amount with principal and interest less any payments or any penalties for the first loan for $75,000, the total amount due is $30,242.63. That is both principal and interest. And on loan 2, which was the original loan amount of $55,000, the total principal and interest due is $32,649.60, with the total amount due of $62,892.23.
I have a question for Adam. If you pledge inventory and receivables for a loan, and you dispose of all that stuff, and you don't pay,
At the time,
is that just a moral
it
dilemma,
kind of
or
becomes
is that
a-
illegal?
It kind of becomes a moral dilemma, because by the time they became in default, the inventory was gone. Why in the world they did not take a deed of trust on the building or a mortgage, I have no idea. And I wasn't here when this took place, so maybe Deb can speak to it. Also, there were no personal guarantees, and now we have a corporation that is dissolved with no assets.
And add
So
to
moral
that,
dilemma, yes, probably. More.
Yeah, it just
You know, at the
doesn't
time,
rest with,
You had to know at the time, but they were current when some of that was going on, George.
yeah.
But there was no fallback. That's the problem. There was no collateralization of the building, so when Ace came in and bought it, we're scrambling, there's no deed of trust, there's no mortgage, we're not sitting in a position behind a bank, which I don't care as long as we're sitting in a position somewhere.
Yeah.
And there was no personal guarantees to the members of the corporation. So we were stymied in
It's
that
kind of
sense.
like.
the documents are the
The
issue.
people who owe it can walk down, or the people that signed it can walk down the street and say, ha ha ha, we juked you.
We, in the more recent, since I've been here, we've been taking deeds of trust.
Yeah.
And we've also taken personal guarantees from the primaries in the corporations. We were under collateralized when we did these loans. Basically.
Just a couple of quick things I would add. MKRR is the name of the corporation that was the hardware store, which is now Ace Hardware. They changed affiliations with they were Hardware Hank, and then they were some other. They had a tremendous amount of unpaid accounts receivable. So after a hailstorm and somebody walked and didn't pay a tremendous amount of money. I personally was not employed at NNDC at the time these loans were taken out, but I will tell you, it's public record, that NNDC also had loans from our revolving loan fund to the MKRR Corporation. Our documents were not a whole lot better, but we did in fact have a personal guarantee signed. We followed up monthly, stayed on top of written documented contact to try to recoup the debt. And so when the Ace Hardware store came in and essentially told them, either you sell what you've got left to us, or we will build from scratch and we'll just put you out of business. And it was about that blunt. And so they sold it.
Wait a minute, could you repeat that, please?
When Ace Hardware started looking at Chadron, they wanted that corner, they wanted the business, they offered them money for it.
Offered them, who's them?
The people who owned it, is that?
It's public.
Okay. Merlin and Carlene Gramberg and their daughter and son-in-law. Merlin, Carlene, Robin, and Robert. That's the MKRR. They owned the previous hardware store and were essentially held hostage by the guy who came in and wanted to build it, and it's perfectly legal. He did absolutely nothing wrong. He just came in and said, I'm warning you. You either sell me what you've got left and your property, or I'll just put you out of business. That's what Carlene told me personally. And so they did, and there was not enough money from the sale of the business, or what was left, to pay off the loans that were out there. Like I said, NNDC chose to be pretty vigilant about staying on top of it and trying to get some kind of payment from them, and actually rewrote those loans to a separate corporation that they currently have, and have worked that out a long time ago. I don't know the details about how difficult it was to try to negotiate something with him. What I do know is block grant money that the city of Chadron has is similar to the block grant money that we operate on behalf of Dawes County. And there are options if you have a loan go bad. And that, in fact, happens all across the state every day. This is not something that is unique to Chadron or unique to this business. The option, of course, to write off the debt means that they are off the hook. It also means that you get it off your books as bad debt, and it is grant money that the state of Nebraska then has documents that say this money has been spent, will not be recouped. We don't need to be asking the city to justify it or to tell us what they're doing with it any longer. The reality is that's the easy way to clean it up for the city of Chadron. We are now at least 2 or possibly 3 city managers since the project was written. Certainly at least 3 or more economic developers since that deal was done. And hopefully there's been a lesson or 2 learned.
And I would hope so from the documents we're using now,
Yeah.
which we've adjusted to our collateralization. As far as, I like real estate. Because when real estate
Well, in
gets
some
sold, we're at
cases-
least in line. And, and
In some cases, we don't have the first deed. We're in a second position behind a bank. We generally, or very frequently, will take the second position, but we are almost always, if there is a deed of trust involved, we may even be in a third position.
we argue with them sometimes about second position.
And who's we in this case?
The city on these kind of.
Are we still in the CDBG business?
Well, this is, we deal with this with LB 840. We deal with this with anything.
Okay, but
Anytime we're banking.
Okay.
Yes, you are still in the LB8, in the CDBG business.
Yes. Anytime, and there are some loans that go from both organizations.
That's correct.
And there are some discussions.
You have some monies that are
Banks are
currently
gonna be-
being repaid back to you.
Generally, the banks are going to be in the first position.
Yep.
And then we're second, third, but at least we're in a position.
Yeah.
I don't like the inventory collateralization. It's okay. You take everything you can get, George. You know that. But when
that
that's
was
just
the
a
personal
single
guarantee, I
and
don't
single and sole element, we were under collateralized at the time we made the loan.
The recommendation from someone, whether it was the ED person or the city manager at the time or whatever, was they're good for it.
So am I hearing that we have no options? That there is the
Legally,
likelihood that we can never
legally,
get the money?
there's nothing to chase here. They're judgment proof. There's no assets in this corporation because
It
it
was
is
an
a corporation.
LLC, wasn't it?
It's a corporation, I think. It's a I believe it's a corporation, Mark.
But anyway.
There is none. It's dissolved.
There's the
dissolved with
corporation
no assets.
LLC is gone.
So you sue the entity, there's no assets. And I've discussed that with their attorney. He's well aware. Don't like it.
Right. I mean, people make bad decisions all the time. They have health emergencies and they come into extreme debt. They lose their houses. Their lives are ruined. And here, I'm very uncomfortable with this because we are just going to tell these individuals, this enterprise that no longer exists, that, oh well, we're just out $62,000. And
And frankly, it's the state of Nebraska that's out $62,000
Right.
It's
because
actually not even the state of
they-
Nebraska.
it's federal money that was
federal
granted to
dollars
the
that
state.
We don't have that money to reloan to other people
Right.
anymore.
That's correct.
So
That's what
the
you lose.
point. It has
That is
been
what you
lost
lose.
for the opportunity of other people. And the next resolution, we're going to be talking very hard to people who owe us $225. So these people, it makes me angry. And
I think
I
it
don't think
should.
it's right.
I think it should, but I still have to tell you legally
Yeah.
where you're at.
Right, I understand that. So my question.
Morally, I agree with you.
Right. This is a moral issue, and I think we need to bring that into our policy discussion. So,
In the future, absolutely. This one,
so are we going to, do we have something in place when something as dramatic as this happens, that we will not go into negotiations with business?
again, it's the strength of the documents.
Some of it is going to be negotiations. What we're trying to do is collateralize ourselves to the point that if I've got the individual signatories signing off on documents and their corporation, because people hide in corporations. Cheryl,
Yes.
That's why they create them.
I'm well aware
That's
of
one of the
that.
reasons.
Yes.
So if I've got some personal guarantees and they're letting this corporation or LLC go, but they still have personal assets, they're still exposed because of their personal assets. Okay?
But I will also remind you, Cheryl, as I think we've tried to explain every time we talk about the revolving loan fund, is it is in fact, by design, higher
These
risk
are high-risk loans.
than the bank. It is a fund that helps make a deal work when it otherwise might not have. Our lending capacity, we have to be very careful so that we have money to lend to the next person. But the two things that we absolutely have to do is we have to treat people fair, legally, and I understand your comment about letting this one go when you're going to get hard-nosed about a smaller amount later on. The time to have been making sure that was possible was when the loans documents were created. But in this particular case, understand that we lend money at a much higher risk type of project or business deal than the bank. That's why they're in the first position, we're in the second. So by nature, the failure rate is higher in this type of lending.
You're
than-
going to have a percentage of failure rate with these higher-risk loans.
And in NDC, I think we've written off one in the 5 years I've been on the board, and we're still trying to get it, but it's not unusual with these types of loans.
I don't want to make any blanket comment about whether or not someone tried to cheat the system or not. That really is immaterial at this point for this specific discussion. So to say that, they're getting away with it when, believe me, I would suspect they would much rather have not gotten away with any of that. That it's been costly all the way around, so enough said.
Is there anyone from the audience who'd like to speak to this?
Good evening, Council. John Coates, I'm a resident of Chadron. I had visited with prior city manager to Mr. Yonker coming on as city manager about my concern for this particular situation. Aren't you a little surprised as a council that there's no representatives here from this dissolved corporation to stand up for their reputation? It says here in your resolution that the council, having been fully advised and having no other options. Has anybody from the council or the city offered to sit down with these principals and see if we could arrive at some type of a compromise
And
in
I
the
can,
last 2 to 3 years?
and I can actually address that. I actually attempted to, and I have reached out to both Carlene as well as Robert, and they both came into my office and sat down and basically said, because we are not personally liable for the loans, we're under no obligation to pay this, and that was the end of the conversation, and they walked out of my
And
office.
then the next contact we had was from their attorney, which precludes us from any further personal contact with them, John.
Well, they're under no obligation, but again, I mean, did they know this was coming before the council tonight?
It was, made part of the notice as the agenda
Public
that was on the agenda.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm here. Because like I say, I had visited with City Manager Anderson about this. I don't know if at that time it was too late or not, but it was fairly early on in the process. I just feel like total exoneration of this particular loan. And it says that there was a signed promissory note. Now, I understand that promissory note didn't probably mean anything. Nor did the business loan agreement mean anything when they signed it. But total exoneration, I think, really sends a bad message. That if we do have other people that are in similar situations, and maybe their particular loan didn't have any personal clause to make them responsible for the loan outside the assets of the business and the inventory. And George, I don't know about assets and inventory, but I do know that when that store closed up, there was still a lot of stuff in there, so it went somewhere.
Yep.
And it was totally.
That was relates to my question.
When Ace came through.
Again, there was
So,
probably
I mean,
there was lien holders. Lien holders in front of us.
That's why I asked Adam, is this just a moral thing, or is there some kind of criminal intent to say, I pledge this, but not
I think
take the money and use
the
it for
intent
something
at the
else?
time the signatures were taken. Promissory note, you have a going entity.
Mhm. I think at the time.
I think the time that
these were approved,
they're not
the
happy, but
reputation of individuals was very high. Okay. There's also just one administrative question. Should both of these be on the same resolution, since there are two different groups of signers? And I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
I think it can be in one resolution.
Well, John,
Semantically speaking.
before you leave the podium, you didn't give us a solution.
Okay.
You
I
gave us a problem.
well,
I mean, do you have a suggestion?
I gave a solution in that maybe you could sit down with the principals and see.
But
Adam said,
The problem is, they are represented by council. So that precludes a phone call from us to them without going through their attorney.
In which we have already attempted to reach out to them to try and see if they would be willing to, do something to basically make this right. And at that point, because of the conversation we had, and then basically saying we're not responsible for it. And
Okay,
then the
well, I
next
commend you for
conversation
doing
was,
Yeah.
and then the next conversation was directly related with their attorney. We basically are now in this position.
Adam, do we issue a 1099-C, cancellation of debt on it?
To a dissolved corporation.
Well, but then,
We can talk about that.
Is there any further discussion?
I got one question. I'm going through the financials tonight. How much do we have outstanding in CDBG loans? I normally have that in my head, and
that's not on the cash basis financials, that's on the accrual basis.
So we're not gonna. It's not gonna be in this one.
Not
We
going
have
to have any effect on those statements.
But I can follow up and get you what the
I think it's like
outstanding.
it's $500,000. I can't. I have completely forgotten this.
I think the only outstanding loan you have left on that's any CDBG money is Domino's. Because it had both, it had CDBG and LBF. The other loans were LBF.
Yeah, I just can't remember, right?
It's not happening.
It's a $500,000, okay.
So what happens if this resolution does not pass?
Then we get it back in another 6 months.
Well, the auditor has dinged this.
The problem that we'll have is we will basically then have essentially compliance from DED that says that if you are unwilling to take any action for the collection of this debt, then we're going to have to bring it back up essentially because they have already today asked us where our compliance is with either the collection of the debt or writing this off. So we just got that request already today via email from DED that said, what are you guys doing to address this issue?
And it could
So-
jeopardize future
Future
CDBG
funds.
applications if you don't clean it up.
So the individuals who have decided not to pay this debt are walking away, and our city then is getting harassed that we need to do something, and then the money is not available to go to others. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that the reality?
I wouldn't characterize it as walking away, but I understand what you're saying. You are not out a nickel in terms of costing the city, you just don't have it to relent. The state of Nebraska is not finding,
Thank you.
sorry, the state of Nebraska is not fining the city, is not requiring you to pay every nickel back you ever got in CDBG money, which they could do. What they're telling you to do is clean this up, or we could go to the next step, which would be make you ineligible for CDBG projects, a whole variety of things. Because they are the stewards of federal money. This has never been the city's money. It was granted to the city to lend to somebody, and when it got paid back, you were supposed to have either paid it back to them or continued to relend it. So, Cheryl, your comment about are they walking? Yes. Legally, they have every right and apparently are exercising that right. Is it making the city look bad? I think the city has a responsibility to clean it up so that the state of Nebraska doesn't continue to ask you what you're doing about it. And then you, yes, have 32 or 60, whatever, what was the total? 60-some $1,000 less in your CDBG relending fund. That is in fact true.
And didn't we get dinged on the audit for this too?
Yes, this has been an audit finding for multiple years.
I think that's where John found it the first time, if I remember right.
Yeah, this has been an audit finding that, essentially our auditors have requested us to address this issue as well within our financial systems, that we either show progress on the collection of it or essentially put it into our uncollectible debt category within our financials. So they have requested that we take some kind of formal action just to clean it up on our financials, because if not, it is hanging out there as a basically collectible debt, even though it's uncollectible.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, I am a person who believes in hope, and I hate to give up on anything. And I would like to put out a personal request to the family that they please come and speak to us at the city, because we would greatly appreciate a $100, a $200 per month payment towards reducing this debt. Because I, on principle, am very uncomfortable with just writing off a $62,000 debt. Thank you.
Okay. Can we get roll call, please?
Warner.
Aye.
Welch.
No.
Klein.
Reluctantly, yes.
Crumpet.
We can only afford one, no.
Yes, ma'am. All right, moving on to item K.
Thank you.
Or, sorry,
for
Jay.
sticking around.
Sorry, you guys. We're getting to you, I swear. Can we get an introduction?
Oh, second, I missed, like you. Introduce resolution 2019, text 67, move for its adoption.
Second.
All right, resolution number 2019-67 is to place a lien for outstanding utility charges against lots 241 and 242 of the Kenwood Edition, also described as 502 West Niobrara Avenue. All the exciting stuff's over. All right, would anyone like to speak to this? Nope. All right. Any discussion? No? All right.
Well, I guess, we're putting a lien on this because this individual has not paid $222. So is it a property that's for sale? Let me see. I think the last payment was October of 2018. So it's been 8 months, so it seems like.
The city code provides that once an account's 3 months delinquent, we can bring it to the council to ask for a lien against the property. And this was one that the utilities clerk brought forward to ask that we bring to the council.
Obviously, the water service is shut off now.
Yes.
Correct.
Mhm.
Okay.
And so, as Mr. Coates had just suggested, people have gone and spoken with this individual, or what?
There've been attempts made to collect
Yeah, they have.
the dollars.
Through our process, we send collection notices and delinquent notices, and based off of the lack of response for this, the next step is then to bring it forth to council for the lien being filed on the property.
So was this a rental, and the renters did not pay?
I don't believe this was a rental property, no.
Or is this the individual that's elsewhere?
No, this is actually a owner-occupied property, it's not a rental. So the account,
Owner-occupied?
so the account holder is the owner listed on the parcel, Dawes County. So it is not a tenant who, it is the actual property owner.
Okay, so they're living there without running water, is that what I'm hearing?
I don't believe this particular individual is living there. I believe he resides elsewhere.
State of Nebraska
Yep.
is taking care of it.
Yes. He's no longer local.
Okay.
Okay.
I wanted to make sure I didn't.
Roll call, please.
Warner,
Aye.
Welch,
Yes.
Klein,
Yes.
Crumpet,
Yes, ma'am.
Introduce resolution 2019, text 68, move for its adoption.
Second.
Resolution number 2019-68 is to place a lien on for outstanding utility charges against part of Lot 19, all of Lot 20, and part of Lot 21, Block 50, Pioneer Townsite Company First Edition, also described as 129 Lake Street.
and this one, the utilities clerk, Lori Storbeck, became aware that the properties up for sale could be sold in the immediate future.
So to collect on this, we need to get a lien before it's sold or we could be out.
Yes.
Correct.
All right, any discussion?
So as high as this one is, I assume that they're still living in it, making,
Because it's got,
barely
They
make,
went to Whitney and they're not returning calls.
oh, okay. So it's vacant also, huh? All right.
Okay, roll call, please.
Warner,
Aye.
Welch,
Yes.
Klein,
Yes.
Crumpet,
Yes, ma'am. L, please.
Sorry. Non-practice.
I'd like to introduce Resolution 2019-69, and move for its adoption.
I'll second.
2019-69 is to recommend award of bid for the 2019 concrete street repair project. Would you like to talk to this, Milo? Or?
Sure.
I know you've been itching to talk.
Milo Rush, Public Works Director. We bid out a bunch of the concrete projects throughout the city that we felt were the most needed repairs. We've actually got right at 910 square yards of concrete repair and 75 linear feet of curb and gutter repair sections that we bid. We had two bidders. One was Vintage Masonry and the other was Fuller Construction. And total bids received was Vintage Masonry was $99,771 and Fuller Construction was $90,957. And we recommend we go ahead and award the bid to Fuller's. And we'll get our concrete jobs done, caught up, and then Terry can go ahead and do the asphalt job.
All right, any discussion? All right, can we get roll call, please?
I have a question.
Nope.
Is it possible to break some of these bids up so that the smaller entity has a chance at this?
It's Vintage Masonry is probably, in terms of work, they're probably considered a small business that would be able to bid on this. So, in terms of breaking this up into scope, I think it's in terms of value and quantity. You start breaking it up into really small chunks, you're not going to get the value, so the price is going to be substantially higher.
It's like buying in bulk.
Well, in similar size contract last year, we got the contract guys out of, concrete guys out of Alliance, and they were pretty small.
And we do try to break out the little projects and give the locals and the smaller contractors, what I want to say, a chance at them. This was one that we wanted to try and get as much done for the dollars we had and get it in one lump sum so we could show that this was our match for the federal, state dollars, that we had that as one lump sum. And we'd like to have it in one area, but we didn't have enough work in one area. We had too many little small projects we needed to get done. So we tried to break them down, we just couldn't with this one.
Right, okay. Thank you. I think that's an important effort. And obviously, our streets are definitely in need of repair, so.
Yes, we agree.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Warner.
Aye.
Welch.
Yes.
Klein.
Yes.
Crumpet.
Yes, ma'am.
Introduce resolution 2019 tax 70 and move for its adoption.
I'll second that.
They've been waiting.
Oh.
All right, resolution number 2019-70 is to approve change order number 1 for RCS Construction Incorporated for the West Storage Tank Interior Repairs Project.
Is there a second on that?
Oh, I thought I heard a second, I'm sorry.
George did.
I did.
George.
George.
At the recommendation of city member Ken Johnson a couple of weeks ago, she suggested maybe we give an overview of the project too, and so we put together a little presentation for it.
That's it. You're welcome to share.
We thought that this would be timely just in terms of this project's been kind of in the works for several years, and so just for the benefit of the council and just to give you some background on where we're at and where we're going with this project, we just thought it'd be good to give you a brief overview. So Jack Baker with Baker & Associates and Brett Meyer as well. And so I'll kind of turn over to Brett and he can kind of help me run through this real quick. But so basically the tank project is broken down into 3 phases, and we're now in the final phase, the 3rd phase of the project. The first phase being some valve replacements around the tank, and then the second one being exterior repairs of the tank, and then the 3rd one now that we're in is the interior repairs of the tank. So
is that the inside of the tank?
That's the inside of the tank.
Yeah, kind of unique in that Chadron has a in-ground concrete tank, over 100 years old, 1 million gallon tank. You don't see those all the time, and so it's just to a point where it needed some
And those are
needs
wood,
maintenance.
wood posts?
No, those are concrete.
Those are concrete?
So the tank was originally, we think, built over 100 years ago, and then originally with a wood roof. Then sometime about in the late 1930s, they added the concrete roof. So all the pillars and everything like that were added after the fact of the original tank being built.
So,
and there really hasn't, other than adding some valving and doing different sources and supplies coming into the tank, like from the well field or from the dam stuff, there hasn't been much work done on it at all.
So those concrete pillars inside the tank, are they, I'm sure we would have heard about it if they're not in good shape. Are they remarkably well built, or?
For the age of it, I would say yes. That doesn't mean that there wasn't some necessary repairs and some upgrades, and we'll kind of get into that. Yep.
So during phase one, we replaced 7 14-inch water valves in and around the tank. On the discharge and supply piping, and that was about $134,000. That was completed in fall of 17. In phase two, we repaired and rebuilt the exposed and deteriorated portions of the exterior of the tank. That was completed in the spring of 18. It cost about $108,000. Now we're in the about 80% complete with phase three, and that includes repair and coat of the interior walls, ceiling and floor, sealing and coating the tank exterior, and then replacing 3 remaining valves as well. So, and then we just have some kind of before and after photos.
You can kind of see in the first picture, both these pictures are before any work was done after the tank was drained. And you can kind of see up near the top.
And this was last month?
Yeah, it was drained late April, right. You can kind of see in some of these areas a little harder. But like this new concrete here is from when we did the exterior. So that was one of those holes that was there before, and then there's some significant deterioration. We built up the exterior half, and now we need to finish with the interior half, essentially, on the tank wall. So if you go to the next picture, you can see it a little bit better, the repair areas where we have shotcrete to fill out that wall to its original thickness. Okay. This is kind of a before and after. This is one of the worst parts of the ceiling. You see, there really wasn't much cover between the rebar. Rebar was in remarkably good shape. There is a little bit of scaling, but in a couple areas where you cut through, you can see significant deterioration of the bars. So we're patching up the inside, and then we'll also be coating with an epoxy on the ceiling. Then we have different cementitious waterproofing for the walls, just to give that concrete a better protection. Exterior, it is kind of bled out. There was a couple areas in the exterior, so it's so the pictures aren't better, but there's a chunk of concrete that was missing, and just some spalling and cracking. There was 1 or 2 areas where you could actually see daylight through it. And then now, if you go out and you can take a look at it, it looks much better. And then just some valves. One of these is what we'll address as far as one of the change orders, but all the valves so far have been replaced. So, I mean, as far as in and around the tank in itself, we have the original, 14, and then these 3, and then an extra one that we put in. So 18 valves in total were changed out in and around.
Brett, you might just tell them this picture. I'm trying to get an arrow here.
Yep, the first picture on the left there, that was the change in configuration, and we'll get to that. I think that's the second.
Was that pit full of junk, or is we just a different perspective?
No, that'll
different valve.
So one is one of the valves in a vault, and the other one is the connection that will eventually be buried, and then they'll just put a valve box on top of that to come up.
2 different pictures.
Yep.
Valves.
Yep. Valve being replaced. That's pretty much it for right now.
Are there any efficiencies being gained by the valves, like anything that is automated or just makes them easier to use?
Two things happen. The valve on the left, or the structure on the left, allowed us to bring water from the well fields and tie it in and put it right into the clear well and actually feed the town while we had the tank offline. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brett.
Nope, you're correct.
Then the other valve was an upgrade from an existing, the one on the right was an upgrade from an old gate valve. And they put a butterfly valve in here so that they could upgrade it from probably 50 years and have a new valve that was workable. And this provides the mechanism to shut off the tank and turn on the tank and flow to the town. It just gives us, that was the one thing about all the valve upgrades, it gives us the opportunity to work the system a little different. One way was we could bring in and bypass. The other way was we could take and go right into the tank with the well water. And now we can bypass with the well water, or take the clear well and take and bypass. And that was the idea by the upgrades of some of these valves and improvements. I mean, the only thing we didn't really get done, and we're working on that in the next phase, is how to take and work directly to the east tank, which is above the college. But this improved the system for the city right there at the million-gallon tank at the water plant. And that's why we did it. And then the next part of this that we're talking about is to put this butterfly valve into that vault and get it out. When you put it in there originally, it had a 21-inch,
That's it, yeah, 21.
manhole ring in there, a manhole and ring. And we didn't want to leave that valve in. And in the discussion in the process of putting the butterfly valve, it was better to upgrade the manhole lid covers. And that's where we're at with the two change orders. One change order is on the left south for the improvements we did there. The other is for the lids on the two pits.
Okay.
You can imagine they're 14-inch lines, which are to a certain extent a little odd in city standards. Usually go 12 to 15 even. The vaults apparently, as we now know, and didn't initially know, the vaults were put in after the valves were. We know this because it would be impossible to get the old gate valves out of the vaults through the existing manhole access cover. We talked with Tom with the city and kind of determined that it probably wouldn't be the best thing if you need to get in there and do maintenance or do anything with the existing valve, because we potentially could have left the old gate valve in that vault. But it was just felt that that would be creating more problems, and this was an upgrade to the tank. So let's make sure we're doing everything correctly and not leaving a mess for other people to take care of.
Dealing with construction that old, and you don't always know the size of every fitting and size of the lines in and out. So that's kind of what this boils down to, is we encountered some unknowns, and so we've got a couple changes that came about, and felt like it was the cleanest way to get everything done and get it built properly. So.
Okay.
I'd just like to say that butterfly valves were the bane of my existence on 3 different ships.
Like the gate valve better.
Love them.
The one that I think we're showing in there actually was leaking a little bit. And it kind of caused us a little. But it was a gate valve though.
Oh, it was what, 100 years old? Jeez.
I mean, it was a trickle of water, but it's still
like the rest of the tank, the old stuff worked.
All right, thank you. I guess at this point, any further discussion? Then roll call, please.
Warner.
Aye.
Welch.
Yes.
Klein.
Yes.
Crowfoot.
Yes, ma'am. Moving on to N, please.
Introduce resolution 2019-71 and move for its adoption.
I'll second that.
2019-71 is to approve change order number 2 for RCS construction. I would dealing with the West Storage Tank Interior Repairs Project. Pretty much just covered everything. I hope we don't need to sit through that again. I guess if you really wanted to. Otherwise, can we have roll call, please?
Werner.
Aye.
Welch.
Yes.
Klein.
Yes.
Crumpet.
Yes, ma'am.
Introduce Resolution 2019-72 and move for its adoption.
Second.
Resolution 2019-72 is to approve application for payment number 1 for RCS construction for the West Storage Tank Interior Repairs Project. Would anyone like to speak to this?
This is just the first.
You got to talk to the folks at home, shipmate.
Yeah. So this is just the pay application, and so as they progress through the work, then they apply for the work completed, and you pay them as they go, and we hold back a certain amount of retainage until they're all done. But this is the first pay app, although it covers a majority of the work. It's just the first one that was submitted, and so you'll probably see 1 or 2 more to finish out the contract, but that's all it is.
Okay, thank you. Could we get roll call, please?
Werner.
Aye.
Welch.
Yes.
Klein.
Yes.
Crumpet.
Yes, ma'am. The next item is to do appointments for the Downtown Plaza Subcommittee. This is creating a subcommittee of the Downtown Plaza Committee, right?
Well, I'm trying to remember back when the council created the subcommittee. This is just appointing the 2 members from the general public to this.
Okay.
So the committee was already created by resolution, or the subcommittee was already created by resolution. This is just appointing the 2 members to that.
So we're appointing
Matt Reeves
and
Steve
Steve Cleveland. Okay, I was reading it right. So we need a motion to appoint them, correct?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't see her.
I'll make a motion to appoint Matt Reeves and Steve Cleveland to the Downtown Plaza Subcommittee.
Do you have a second?
Second.
All right, roll call, please.
Werner.
Aye.
Welch.
Is this something I can vote on? Yes. Yes. Okay.
Klein.
Yes.
Crumpet.
Yes, ma'am. Good question, now. Don't vote for yourself. You'll lose the election. Moving on to Q.
Make a motion to approve the claims.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, could we get roll call, please?
Werner.
Aye.
Welch.
Yes.
Klein.
Abstain or the payment totals.
Crumpet.
Yes, ma'am. Moving on to the city manager report.
I don't have anything for this evening.
All right, we can skip resolution 2019-73. Oh, no, we
We
do have
can't.
to. So used to that. Holy cow.
You could, but it would just not be excused.
Oh, I don't know. All right. Would someone like to introduce resolution?
I'll introduce Resolution 2019-73 and move for its adoption.
Can we get a second?
I'll second that.
All right, this is to excuse the absence of Miles Bannon so he doesn't get a knock on his record. Could we get roll call, please?
Werner.
Aye.
Welch.
Yes.
Klein.
Yes.
Crumpet.
Yes. Thought
Kinda.
about it. All right, council closing comments. I guess you're up, Mark.
I just want to echo Deb Cottier's comments about contacting our senators and our representatives, keep them pushing for the Job Corps team.
Thank you, Mark. A little bit on that note, it's really important, I believe, for all of us to be active participants in our democracy. And making those calls and making your voice heard is very important. It was very rewarding for me to go to Washington, D.C. Last week. And just as I feel that as a constituent for Senator Sass, Senator Fisher, and Representative Smith, that it was important to voice my perspective and opinion on climate change. I would like to ask all of the constituents here in Chadron to reach out and let us know what your opinions are. It's very, very important. and I would look forward to hearing from people. My email is cwelch, Chadron City Council, @gmail.com. Please let me know what you think about the issues. Thank you.
Like to remind the public, this Thursday morning, we'll have another honor fight leaving. Program will be at 9 o'clock. They'll take off from the American Legion at 10. If you have a marquee, put the information up. It'd be nice. Salute the veterans as they go out of town, and they'll have a good trip. And I think Chief's going all the way, he said. Unless,
Yeah, I'm going
Good
all the
deal.
way down there, we'll go down and talk to all the law enforcement to help you guys out on the way.
appreciate it.
Okay, and I have nothing to say. Can you get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Roll call, please.
Warner,
Back.
Welch,
Yes.
Klein,
Yes.
Crowfoot.
Yes, we are adjourned.